with that, I would like to hand over and introduce Laure Wessemius-Shibrak, who is the Managing Director of the Netherlands Advisory Board on Impact Investing, and she will be moderating the first panel on unlocking greater private sector investment in digital for agriculture solutions. Laure, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dan, and thanks for your introduction. I think you're really setting the context well. So my name is Laure Wessemius-Shibrak. I have the pleasure of directing the Netherlands Advisory Board on Impact Investing. The NAB, as we say in short, is part of a global network, the Global Steering Group on Impact Investing, that has more than 700 practitioners of impact investing in the world. So as you can guess, we basically in the consortium led by Wageningen University, we bring the investor angle in the digital Agri Hub. And as Dan mentioned earlier today, basically the need for funding is one of the three essential elements to give successful access to funding and help reach SDG 2. So I'm very happy to welcome three very experienced speakers today for our panel. Albert Boogaert is head of smallholder solutions at Rabo Partnerships from Rabobank. Danny O'Brien is managing director of Emea and global programs, SVG Ventures at Thrive. And Maurice Schepens is Senior Investment Officer at FMO, the Dutch Development Bank. Maybe just before starting that, I'm going to give them the word to introduce themselves. A little bit of framing. AgTech is, of course, immensely broad. So to frame a little bit our conversation today, I would just like to mention that without presuming of any definition of AgTech, we just want to focus on AgTech solutions that help improving income and productivity of smallholder farmers in low and middle income countries. So just to help us focus on some aspect. And we're going to see during the conversation today that there are many ways of dealing with this and the broader definitions of AgTech. We'll come to that. But without further ado, I would like to let our panelists today introduce themselves. Maybe Albert, would you like to start?
Yes, thanks, Laure. Can everybody hear me? Perfect.
Very well.
Yeah, so my name is Albert Boogaert from Rabobank. I work at the Rabo Partnerships, which I joined 1 year ago to coordinate internal activities and ventures around smallholder farmers. I do that together with my colleague Shanou Saran, well known to some of you. And basically, those are new functions as beyond Rabo Foundation and Rabo Partnerships, a lot of new activities have emerged in Rabobank around smallholders. It's a combination of internal ventures, very well known as carbon sequestration, the Acorn project, but also around supply chain finance, a couple of external ventures with Bayer, with MasterCard, for instance. We work on internal capabilities like remote sensing, credit scoring and analytics, external investment like AgroStar in India, for instance, and of course the cooperation with the Rural Fund Foundation and let's say the more traditional Rabo Partnerships investment. But in everything we do in Rabobank, the financial angle is key. So whenever we look at AgTech, it's always from the financial sector and the access to finance perspective. So AgTechs can provide a lot of relevant services and products to farmers, but we look at it as data providers that provide data that is also useful for the financial sector, like remote sensing, like ERP, SaaS platforms, etc. And basically we see a lot of potential, not just to digitize supply chains, but also to redefine the business in supply chains, providing new roles to a lot of traditional players. Most of the experience I have with AgTechs comes from my previous job as innovation lead in Rabo Foundation, where we worked together a lot with NPM and CTA, one of the predecessors of the current platform or the hub. And when we started that work in 2016, the idea was that digitization could help reduce the cost of lending and the transaction cost the risk cost, the cost. We learned a lot in the last 5 years. Some examples and companies we helped grow are very famous and successful today. Others completely failed. So a lot of lessons learned, and happy to share some of those insights with you, and looking forward to a great conversation. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Albert. Looking forward to hearing your experiences as well. Danny, would you like to continue?
Sure. Thank you, Laura, Simona. Thanks for having me today. And it's great to appear alongside some great panelists today, and looking forward to the conversation. And my name is Danny O'Brien. I'm the Managing Director of Emea and Global Programs at SVG Ventures Thrive. For those of you who don't know us, we are a global innovation and investment platform focused on agri-food tech. We're based in Silicon Valley, but have offices in Canada and Europe, and soon to be more locations announced soon as well, but very much a global focus. We have invested in about 70 startups to date, from about 15 countries all around the world, including Europe, Latin America, Africa, Australia, US and Canada, of course, as well. Beyond startups, we work with about 40 corporations who would be some of the biggest in the agri-food value chain. We help them on their innovation strategies, on finding the right startups to pilot with, M&A advisory, etc. Over the last year, we held a number of challenges to find the best startups in key regions. We did one in Europe, we did one in Africa, and we did one in Latin America, for example. So some experience with working with founders in low middle income countries. In terms of my background, I previously ran my own accelerator program. Before that, I did some consulting in New York and London. So I've been around the block a little bit, spent some time in Africa as well. And today I'm based in Dublin in Ireland, and leading our growth here. So yeah, excited to share more on what we're doing today, and listen to what the panelists have to say as well.
Thank you very much, Danny. Maurice, would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Laura. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel. Very excited to talk about this interesting topic about unlocking investments in agri, and in particular the digital solutions that can support agricultural activities in emerging markets. My name is Maurice Schepens. I've been working for FMO for about 15 years. I started off in the inclusive finance space. Then I focused on large agri-corporate investments. Thereafter, I was looking for FMO's farmer financing program. And now I'm leading our agri-tech investments. For the people that are not familiar with FMO, a brief introduction. FMO is a Dutch development bank. We were established about 50 years ago with the mandate to support the private sector in emerging markets. We focus on 3 sectors, being financial institutions, energy, and agriculture. Our product offering ranges from long-term debt to growth equity to also venture capital. And the latter part, of course, the most important and interesting thing that we can offer for this discussion. So with regards to our ventures program, we focus on companies that are looking at Series A rounds or Series B rounds. Specifically in the agri-tech space, it's not just the farmers that are benefiting from our solutions. We also look at solutions that support, for example, supply chain efficiencies. So it's a bit of a broader scope than was just introduced by Laura, because for us, SDG 2s are very important. It's about farmers, it's about crop improvement, yield improvements, but it's also about getting the production from the land to the consumer. So notable investment that we have made, some of you might know the companies, the Hat in India, Waycool in India, but also Aerobotics in Africa, for example. And we also invest, by the way, not only in companies, but also in fund managers. Omnivore is I guess, a known actor in the agri-tech space. So that's one of our partners in India. I'm sure that we can talk a bit more about our innovations and instruments, so I'll leave it here.
Thank you, Maurice. Yes, we will have many opportunities, I hope, in the coming half an hour to discuss that. So yeah, we mentioned how important it is to accelerate private sector investments in digital for agricultural solutions. It is crucial. So maybe actually we can kick off a little bit by asking our panelists what sorry, I'm just losing my notes. My computer is doing very funny things. So there are many solution providers emerging that need skill. And can you, each of you, maybe spend a couple of minutes on explaining to us what the main challenges are that you are seeing right now, and maybe the main success factors that you have encountered. So maybe Albert, would you like to start, kick off, and share with us?
Yeah, sure. And of course, challenges and success factors are all related. They're the reverse of each other.
It's the flip side of the coin.
So what I would say as top success factors in AgTechs dealing with smallholder farmers, and especially with connections to financial services. And that it sounds a bit like a no-brainer, but I would say number one as a top success factor is the strong focus on the farmers and the multiple needs of farmers. And really understanding what is the priority that the farmer has in solving those needs. Because even when the needs are the same, the priorities in solving them may be different. And based on that, integrate products. We know it's all about finance, markets, inputs, knowledge, insurance, etc. But at least combining 2-3 of them initially is what we see as a big success factor. Then the second one, which really goes together with that one, is the ability to recognize that the world is not just digital and also not just physical. But then, of course, the question is, how do you combine that? And there it's the capability to combine the digital and the physical world, and also use digital solutions to manage the physical world, which sounds a bit abstract, but what I'm referring to is agents, farm input dealers, trainers, etc. That you still need. It's not about downloading an app in the Play Store and then your AgTech is successful. People are still needed. It's about real people, real products. But then the way you can manage all the players, the physical players, and the most successful examples I've seen are able to manage that also in a very nice digital way, with like stock management tools for input suppliers. That's one example, but many others. And I would say number 3 is about fundraising skills in terms of success factors. It's a bit of a generic one, but I've seen many companies fail in the Corona crisis and the COVID crisis due to lack of funding, whereas others had just arranged enough funding to weather that storm. And that's of course all related to communicating with investors based on realistic ambitions, faking a little bit, but making it quite soon after that. And yeah, I would say I leave it here for the top 3 of the top success factors.
I'm going to come back to you later because I've got another question, but maybe you will pull it with the other ones. Danny, what can you share with us? In your opinion, what is needed from investors, and what are the main challenges?
Yeah, well, Albert did a great job of outlining and describing the situation there, and that's something we see regardless of what the market is being farmer-centric. And farmer focus is the key thing that every AgTech entrepreneur should be doing. In terms of low middle income countries and Africa, for example, some of the challenges that we see on the ground is access to an ecosystem. So it's, investment is one part of it, but being part of a community or cluster that can even have mentors and examples of previous successes there that they can learn from. And that's something that, compounds over time. And that's something that I think is a great opportunity to actually build up some AgTech ecosystems. There's definitely a lot of emerging tech ecosystems in places like Kenya and Nigeria, etc. But actually, some AgTech clusters is something we're focused on working on, and that could make a real difference. I think one of the core challenges we face or entrepreneurs face when scaling is working with smallholder farmers, because by definition, it takes a long time to get a number of these smallholder farmers on board onto your platform or whatever your product may be, and that slows down your scaling journey. Where there's in other markets, if you target large farmers, you can bring in revenue much quicker. You can start the business, you can hire more people and then scale faster. Whereas you're targeting smallholder farmers, it can sometimes be a challenge, and you often need innovative business models to figure that challenge out, and innovative sales models as well. I would say that kind of sell on your behalf, or have some form of community selling can often be interesting as well. In terms of some of the opportunities, I think things like you hear this word leapfrog technologies often mentioned. You know, in Europe and parts of America, there's a lot of legacy equipment and legacy systems, whereas some of the emerging markets are actually starting a bit more from scratch and can adopt some of these precision agriculture technologies that can make a real difference, especially when it comes to sustainability as well and doing things more efficiently. Of course, as Albert mentioned, financing these innovations is always a challenge, no matter where you are, but especially in emerging markets, and coronavirus has been difficult as well. But there are some of the key things I would say. The final thing to mention is lack of talent as these companies scale. That's always a challenge, regardless of where you are in the world. But again, in emerging markets, it can often be a challenge. But yeah, I'll leave it there for the moment.
Thank you, Danny. Maurice, so what would you add to already what our colleague panelists have said today?
I think Danny and Albert already mentioned quite a number of challenges and opportunities on a company level. So I want to take it one step backwards, and I'm looking more at geographies. Clearly, there's a big difference between, for example, the Indian ecosystem, where there's a good educational system, where there's quite an entrepreneurial spirit, where there's a high level of tech adoption. And if you compare that to, for example, the African ecosystem, and now just to make it easy, I'm just going to generalize and put the whole of Africa in one bucket here, where we see less breadth, less depth of the agri-tech space. So these are challenges that any investor has to deal with, because if you want to support good investments, firstly, you need to be able to source them, to identify them. Ways for us to solve this challenge is actually twofold. So on the one hand, we have recently established a partnership with AgFunder, because crucial is, for example, raising awareness, not just for the international investor community about the promise of agri-tech in Africa, but also about generating interest for prospective or aspiring entrepreneurs in Africa to become active in agri-tech. That's very important. So together with AgFunder, we're going to ensure that there will be more news articles published about agricultural agri-tech companies from Africa. But like AgFunder's international reports about the global state of affairs or its report on the Indian venture space, we are also going to now develop a specific investment report about Africa. That's one way to help raise awareness. A second part, obviously, is this hub, right? The digital Agri Hub platform that allows for investors and also companies to meet each other. That's very important. And thirdly, and it gets also into the topic that Danny was raising about the ecosystem, the lack of talent sometimes, or certain skill sets are still missing. So another initiative that we have recently launched is a partnership with Endeavor. Endeavor helps to build ecosystems across the globe. And together with FMO, they're now going to set up an accelerator program specifically for agri-tech in Africa. About 15 to 20 companies will be selected, and they will follow a mentoring program for about a whole year. In addition to training, also mentoring will be made available. And through this initiative, hopefully will help to further develop the ecosystem, and it also provides some more investment opportunities along the line.
Thank you, Maurice. I already see some reactions in the audience that putting Africa in one single bucket is not necessarily helpful to understand the dynamics. And I'm sure that Maurice also shares that point of view. I think it was just meant as a sort of easy comparison to show that there are obviously some differences in context between, for example, India or another region. But
or maybe then to add, Laura, just to avoid any confusion, that's certainly the case. And also to mention that in our Accelerate program, we are not going to focus just on South Africa or Kenya or Nigeria or Egypt, which are the more sophisticated hubs in Africa. But we are actually looking specifically for Tanzania, for example, or Ghana. So countries that are still facing more challenges in also raising awareness and interest from the international investor community. So by no means I'm trying to put everything on one place, but it was more from a comparison point of view that I was putting it together.
Yeah, I think the audience got it. Thank you, Maurice. But that's actually a very good bridge now to our to another question that I wanted to ask the panelists is, how can you actually leverage the experiences that you've had in certain regions or with a certain type of investees to develop and scale up in different regions. So Maurice, maybe you would like to kickstart on this one.
Yes, and to be mindful of all sensitivities, obviously you cannot replicate solutions in one geography to another geography. At the same time, certain things hold true both in one geography and also another geography. So what we do, for example, we have one of our digital marketplaces that we support, the HAT. They have developed quite an interesting solution that offers farmers with access to knowledge, to inputs, to finance, as well as linkages to markets. There are lots of interesting learnings that the CEO of this company has had to undergo when he was building the company. What we do is introduce him to also interesting opportunities in Africa. So in Ghana, we're looking at a farmer program, and we are linking the CEO to the CEO of the HAT. Those type of facilitation of leadership is something that we believe is very strong, that can help companies to really get to the next level. It's also about ESG support, right? What we have learned on environmental social practices in one geography, sometimes hold true also in other geographies. So by facilitating interactions between sustainability managers from their various teams, that's something that's important. And last but not least, we also have a program that sets up or that facilitates interactions between people on the operational level. So for example, a CFO, that's often a function that early stage companies find difficult to fill. So we're looking at a digital CFO function that can operate across regions, and then different companies can benefit from the skills from a very good CFO.
Yeah, so pooling resources, basically, that's a good idea. Danny, how do you actually approach it from your side, leveraging on each other? Can you actually use what you've learned in one subsector with another subsector on one region and another region? Tell us how you do that.
Yeah, for sure. I think as Maurice touched on, there's, you can't just transplant what's worked in one region to another, but you can definitely learn. And I do actually think there's a few universal truths, at least that I've seen over the last number of years within farming and ag tech. One is when selling to farmers, there's often an education gap, whether when it comes to technology. That could be for different reasons. We speak to farmers every year in the US, in Europe, and Canada to understand what their issues are when it comes to adopting technology. And lack of education around these technologies is a key reason. That's mainly down to demographics. It tends to be an older population, and there's different reasons in other regions. But it's a point that all founders need to be aware of, is communicating their value of their product to the farmer and being farmer centric, being user focused, understanding what they're dealing with, spending time on farms, understanding the issues. We see a lot of startups come our way who work on great technology, AI, machine learning, etc., but they don't understand where the farmer is coming from, and it doesn't always translate. So that's something to be aware of. One thing that we have placed a great focus on is creating a global ecosystem. So, Silicon Valley is great, and we've built up an ecosystem there with Salinas, where there's a lot of growers, etc. And it's great to bring people there, but it's also great to connect them to, around the world as well. So we've placed a great emphasis on building partnerships around the world to share learnings of what's worked in various ecosystems, what's worked with various business models, like I touched on earlier in terms of business model innovation, working with smallholder farmers. There's a lot of learnings that can be translated there, and having a strong mentorship network is something that we have for our accelerator companies, and for all the programs we do. Having a global perspective is key rather than just global. For example, we just launched our latest accelerator program in Calgary in Canada, and a big focus is connecting those startups to mentors from around the world to learn from their experiences and how they can translate them back to that region. So I think it's up to ecosystem builders like some of us on this call today to translate what's worked in other countries and jurisdictions to places like Africa, etc., and localize that with local partners. I think local partners are key to doing that because they understand the context better than anyone could. But it's also down to the founders then to take on board information, mentorship advice from international partners, and screen that as well, and have a healthy degree of skepticism to to understand that not everything that they say is golden or is going to work, and it's up to them to delineate between what will work with their context that they have and what won't, and pursue what's best for the company. So it's probably a bit of a rant, but there's a few thoughts.
So you seem to be screening a little bit what Albert was advising earlier, to work on your fundraising, and sometimes you have to huff and puff a little bit, but still you remain critical in your screening. So that's important as well. I want to come back on Albert. Albert, you've had, basically in the last 5 years, you've been interacting a lot with digital solutions. Is there anything also that you have been able to leverage between your different partners and investees, especially from the finance angle?
Yeah, so it's what we definitely leverage is our own learnings, and they're definitely there. The approach, how to deal with AgTechs, in what stage, understanding how context-dependent solutions are, whether it works or not. So one example of that is, for instance, working capital for AgTechs. We structured that first in India and then replicated ourselves, because we found out there's a bit of a universal need, not just for equity, but also for working capital in AgTechs. And of course, we do have a lot of internal knowledge transfer, as in Rabobank with 40,000 employees. We have quite a number of specialisms on, for instance, on data analytics or remote sensing, etc. We transfer that sometimes centrally, sometimes individually to partners, and that can be replicated as long as you recognize that different contexts and countries need different solutions. So and in other ways we organize challenges. For instance, we did one very recently together with UNCDF. We call it the South-South Challenge, which is all about which Asian companies could work in other countries in Asia or in Africa. So that's all examples of things that we can replicate, not just the challenge, because the selection of a cohort is one thing, but then of course it's the follow-up and the learnings and all the activities around them that really count. Does that answer your question a little bit, Laura?
That's definitely very insightful. I just want to come back on what's needed also for successful fundraising, because at some point during our preparation, I remember we also discussed the importance of capacity building. So I thought maybe Danny, can you tell us a little bit how instrumental it is in your approach?
You're referring to the international investment in places like Africa and things like that?
Yeah, for example, in accelerators programs. So what are the non-financial aspects that are needed next to the financial to make the financial successful?
Yeah, so of course, lack of capital at the early stages always gets pointed out. There can often be grant money available, but it's to really succeed and scale, you need international venture capital or private equity or certain types of finance. It depends on the company, but you need private capital is in short is what I'm saying to really scale. But beyond that, I mean, when we did an Africa challenge this time last year, and we had about 300 companies apply from all over Africa, 27 countries represented, I think it was in the end. And that led to our first African investment in a company called Food Locker from Nigeria. But what we saw was the companies weren't at that point where they were investable just yet. Typically on a whole, there was a few exceptions, of course. And I think there's an element of work to be done at the early stages to help them become market and investor ready. So to work out those kinks at the early stages and understand, break down the barriers of what an international investor or indeed a local VC investor is looking for, what the mechanics of a fund works like and how big the company needs to get in order to make a return. And therefore, you need to kind of map out your vision of how you're going to scale and build this company and provide a return. So there's, breaking down those barriers is key, and educating those entrepreneurs around some models of what can work. And this is why I talked earlier about early examples of success are often crucial as well. And, you see that in Silicon Valley where one company becomes really successful. The people who are in that company then spin off and start up their own companies, and the cycle continues. It continues. And you've seen that in other markets as well. And I think we're still waiting for some of that in African ag tech, for example. I think that's an opportunity. So, you know, Maurice mentioned the Endeavour program, which is hitting the right spot there. You know, that's going to make a big difference, I think, and can build a pipeline of these companies that can be ready and can be ready for international investment, because there's a lot of people looking. Everybody knows the potential of you know, of these emerging markets, but you know, there just isn't enough deal flow there at the moment to make a decision. So there's definitely some work to be done at the early stages, I think.
That's great. Yeah, I think inspiration is really a crucial element, success factor, to know what's possible and what's good, actually, and what to aim for. So definitely, I would like to take a couple of questions from the audience. Maybe starting with an interesting question, because actually there's an acronym that I don't know about. So I'm going to test if our panelists know about it. What role do you see for the CGIAR to support agtech clusters in collaboration with your investment houses? So what CGIAR, what role do you see there? And do you know what it is? Otherwise, I think the person who asked the question is going to have to explain the.
No, I can.
Oh, you can, Albert. Thank you for saving us.
I'm not going to explain what CGIAR is, but it's an international research institute, and I think they do a lot of relevant work already. I would say what is important is on standardization of data and exchange of data. Okay. I think that's the typical two topics that an overarching umbrella organization could facilitate, because all agtechs talk about sharing data, and then of course that's all about willingness, but it's also about legal possibilities. Mm-hmm. But often when that is possible, then the standardization and the collection protocols are so different that exchange of data is a key bottleneck. I didn't mention it in my introduction, but it's definitely one of them. And I think their CGIAR could play a role if they're not doing so already.
Yeah. Is this something that is really crucial for your investment process? The good quality of data, the reliability of data, curation of data?
It depends. It depends. It really depends on which type of agtech. If it's a full-fledged platform, like Maurice mentioned, D4Ag, then they can create their own standards. Mm-hmm. But a lot of agtechs, they depend on sharing data with others. Yeah. And there, the standardization, is of great benefit. Not everybody can basically establish its own farmer network with close to 1 million farmers. So other solutions are needed, especially if you look at farmer cooperatives, farmer organizations, and their data exchange has to play a bigger role than it does currently, and that doesn't go without standards. So it depends.
Yeah. No, so I hope that answered the question from Madeleine Corsi. Thank you for your question. There was another question, which I think is a very interesting one. Is data privacy and transparency a concern to VC and investors in digital ag space? Because in Europe, we have very, very strong, stringent rules, but do we apply that to the smallholder farmers in low and middle income countries? What do we do with their data? How do we ask permission? So any insights there?
Short answer, yes.
Go ahead.
No,
yeah, Albert and then Maurice. I'm very curious.
No, first Maurice.
Firstly, of course, it's very important. It's not just something for the European Union and the market over here that's important. It's important for all markets. So when we, for example, vet a company, we look at the data privacy policy. We also look how they communicate with, in this case, for example, farmers, and how they also record consent. The key question obviously is always, do people fully understand what they are consenting to? And that has also to do with the extension officer that the farmer is dealing with. What is the training the extension officer has received to explain what's happening with data? But I think the important point to make here is that data is instrumental in designing solutions that will benefit farmers. So data is important. Capturing the data is important and analyzing it. But at all times, it should be very important that farmers know exactly what happens with the data, and also that if they stop using the platform, what will happen with their data? Can they continuously using it on an anonymized basis? Can they not use it at all? Can they use it with their names and tags on it? That are questions that we are asking the company, and that we're also verifying with the farmers when we do due diligence on the ground.
Yeah, so you actually check that the organization, when you do a due diligence, your investee has a policy in place and is actually implementing it.
It's a policy. It's also about the local regulations. In Ghana, for example, you need a certain license if you want to be working with farmers and use their data. And it's about how do they capture that data? And again, how do they register? How farmers have consented to sharing that data or not?
No. Albert, do you?
No, I don't have much to add. It's the same process, and even beyond local regulations and GDPR internationally, there's also that ethical component. So it's about consent, it's about proportionality in data sharing. Is the purpose really benefiting the farmer enough to make it worthwhile sharing it? But then still there's always that ethical component. Do farmers really understand it? And that's a more tricky one. But of course we look at that.
Yeah, very good. Danny, there was a question for you actually. It seems your entity has no activity in the Caribbean. Any specific reason?
Well, I mean, we're definitely a global approach and a global platform, but there's many places we haven't invested just yet. I mean, we're 10 years old, and we're definitely open to any opportunity that comes about. I just guess we haven't seen as many opportunities coming through that region so far. So that's the only thing I could say. I'm not as, I cover Emea myself, so I'm not as familiar with the Caribbean, in my current role. But, looking at where our deal flow comes from, I haven't seen a huge amount. We had almost 800 applications this year for our accelerator program. I'd have to check the numbers and get back to you on what came from the Caribbean, but I don't remember a huge amount from that region. So it's no particular reason. It's just lack of deal flow, I'd say. And yeah, would love to hear more if there is stuff we should be aware of in that region, and would love to hear more about it.
Well, if there's someone from the audience that comes from the region, that's hereby an invitation to apply.
For sure.
Okay, I see another interesting question, actually, more general for the three of you. What do you think can be the role of the World Bank in supporting the development of the ecosystem? So do you see a role for a big, large multilateral agency?
I might just start quickly on this, because I've had some discussions around this, speak with some members of the bank. I think they have a great convening power to bring partners together, to move things in the right direction. I know they typically work with governments as opposed to private entities like ourselves necessarily, but I think they've great, the name, the World Bank has great access and can really bring partners together and move the conversation and action in the right direction. That's how I see it. Also can be seen as an unbiased, observer or convener who can kind of highlight what opportunities well, it's maybe hard to say unbiased showing opportunities, but to de-risk opportunities by doing some diligence, etc., behind opportunities that could give some of these early stage companies validation or at least de-risk them, so international investors can come in and look at those companies in more detail as well, I would say.
And maybe good to add is that the World Bank obviously also has a private sector arm called IFC, and the IFC is also making investments in early stage companies. So we, for example, are a co-investor in an agri-tech in India, but they are operating across the globe. So also from an investment point of view, the IFC and the World Bank as such has clearly a role to play.
Yeah. Thanks, Maurice. There was another question as well from Marvin. Are you making a difference between pipeline and platform business models when looking into whether to finance an ag startup? So difference between pipeline and platform business models. I think the one being more practical, well, more what's in your pipeline, the second one more being in terms of theoretically.
Not sure if I understand the question, Laura. I wouldn't know what a pipeline business model is.
Yeah, I think, well, let's ask Marvin to reformulate this question. And for the sake of time, we're going to go to another one. There was a specific question for Maurice. For companies like Aerobotics, how has the scaling journey been from primary country of operation to beyond? And yeah, what key lessons have you learned as an investor?
That's an important question because scaling within the country is already challenging, but scaling internationally is even more challenging because suddenly you have to deal with different regulations, you have to deal with different context, and the fact that farmers respond differently to solutions that are being designed. So for Aerobotics, for people that do not know the company, it's a tool that supports orchard operators to manage their orchards more efficiently. It's done in a way that it helps you with tree counts, it helps you with assessing the tree health, and it gives you actual insights on how to deal with certain challenges that you can face in your orchard. In that sense, we see it actually, and I see it in one of the questions in the chat, it's something that we see as climate resilience because it helps farmers to become more, with precision agriculture, it helps farmers to become more agile in detecting certain pests, for example, in their field and address them. And without spraying a whole plot, they can be very laser sharp targeting of that particular tree that needs treatment and not any other tree. Bit of a sidestep, but it shows that climate resilience is certainly a very important topic for an institution as FMO. So for Aerobotics, one of the major steps that they took is actually going to the US market. The US market is one of the most sophisticated markets from an agri-tech space, but their solution for orchard managers is of such a quality that it actually was very much accepted over there. So by rolling out to the US market, suddenly we got access to to farmers that have larger orchards than we typically see in Africa. At the same time, the need for the solution was the same. So, but it helped that the farmers at Aerobotics, because with Aerobotics, the founders, they come from a farming background, they could actually relate well to the farmers in the US market. And we learned it was very important in the US market that there was a link between the solution and the farming community. Just a salesperson wouldn't do. It was actually the fact that there were farmers behind the solution that really helped selling it. The advantage, and that's something that people should take into account, is that if you have a solution that works in a certain hemisphere, and in Aerobotics, when you look at, for example, citrus, which is growing in South Africa in a certain period of time, then the other part of the year, there's not much business. So if you can actually expand to another geography, which in Aerobotics case was a different hemisphere, they certainly could complement the one off season, which would be the season not being cultivated in South Africa, with the season that would be actually in peak in the Northern Hemisphere. So when scaling internationally, try to look into such value add factors that can really benefit your cash flow. Overall, rolling out is challenging. And my main advice would be focus as well. Don't try to conquer the whole world in one go. Try to be, very focused and see where your solution really adds value. Going to the US worked for Aerobotics. For many companies, it's too advanced, too sophisticated, and it will be challenging to enter that market. But look around. If you're in Ghana, you can go to indeed Nigeria, for example, or you can go to Cote d'Ivoire. Same goes for companies in Tanzania. You can go to Uganda. So try to be in the region, see how that works out for you. But certainly it makes sense. It broadens your customer base. And I think in the end, scaling is very important for any agri-tech company.
Thank you, Maurice. Yeah, I think that's the context is actually always a tricky one. As an investor, you always like to diversify your risk and not put all your investment, all your eggs in the same basket. But it is also a challenge to develop, and we've seen that alongside this hour, to develop solutions that can work on one or the other context. Seeing the time, we have 3 minutes left. So I would very briefly like to ask each of our panelists if they have some key tips to give to investors or maybe solution providers. What's the most important thing they should be thinking about when wanting to scale up? Albert, would you like to start?
Yeah, I would say farmer focus and scalability of the investment.
Yeah, thank you. Danny.
Sorry, I would probably agree with Albert. That's probably the most important thing. But in the interest of giving a different perspective, I'd say also focus on sustainability and impact and communicating what the impact of your innovation is as well. And if it's not, how can it produce impact as well? Because that's what everyone is looking for at the moment. We need solutions that can solve the climate crisis and empower smallholder farmers. So build that into your business or business model as well, I would say.
That's a good one. Thanks, Danny. Maurice.
I would like to give to the audience that please consider what your value add is. Writing a check is relatively easy, but then the real work starts. And then the company is looking for you for advice, for support, for connections. Make sure that you only invest in companies where you can actually play a real active role in supporting the team and the company in its growth. Because otherwise, it's not just about writing a check. Venture capital is about supporting entrepreneurs and teams. And that I think is very important to take into account, considering any opportunity to invest in.
And that's a very nice way to conclude this. We have still many questions. We'll try to see if we can give some follow-up in writing per email to some of them. I really would like to thank our panelists, Albert, Danny, Maurice. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I actually wish we had 2 hours and not 1.